You're listening to the UnCommonCore Podcast.
On your homepage, you have reno.bandcamp.com. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I started using Bandcamp about 2 years ago when I saw that a lot of indie artists were really getting a lot of traffic and sales through there. So someone suggested that I put my catalog up on Bandcamp, and I put pretty much everything I release now is up there, or have released in the past is all on that page now. And whether it's vinyl, digital, or both, it's all up there for people to check out, and if they dig it, they can buy it.
Right. Now, I wanted to go back also, sorry about that, but I want to go back to a little bit of your history, but you have vinyl on there. What's the process of recording vinyl? Is there something special about that? You have to go to a special person who presses a company that presses the vinyl?
Yeah. It's a long, tedious, and expensive process. And there's an upswing on vinyl now. Last few years, it's seen a resurgence.
Yeah, I guess it sold more than MP3. I mean, it sold more than digital last year.
Yeah, I mean, over there, if you look over there in that crate on the floor.
Oh, yeah.
On the left.
You got a lot of records.
On the left-hand side there, everything in there I purchased in 2016. That's all new stuff.
Right.
And I would say that's the most amount of new releases that I ever bought in a single year ever. Is that many records? I don't know. That's like 50s.
Right, yeah. And the record stores, it's funny because the old record stores went out of business, and then the couple hangers on, and then they have these new hip record stores that are coming in.
Yeah.
So,
the hipster.
The people, just like with books and records, they kind of died and killed off everybody that was weak. It's kind of like and now some of the other ones are surviving.
But I also do buy a lot of stuff online as well. Like a lot of those records I got on Bandcamp. I bought them directly from Bandcamp. Because the thing about new indie releases, you're not going to find all that stuff in the stores. You're not going to find all of it. You're going to find a little of this, a little of that. But there's so much stuff coming out that won't be in any store. So you got to get it online somehow.
Right. So when you first started, going back a little bit, were you... was it records you used to listen to? Did you used to go home and before you were a musician and listen to records and you decided you wanted to be a musician? Or was it CDs or was it the radio? What first got you interested in doing being a musician?
Well, I mean, I was into music from a very early age. My mother started bringing home records when I was 5, 6, bringing home like Stevie Wonder records and stuff like Dr. John and Earth, Wind, and Fire and stuff like that. And then I started listening to, I guess I was listening to AM radio at the time and hearing stuff on there. And then I would go to my local record shop that used to be on this very block called the Soul Den and look for that record. Or I would have the guy that ran the store play for me whatever came out that week.
Okay.
So it was at a very early age, 5, 6, when I knew I really liked music. And I was buying my records myself at that age, 6.
5 or 6?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's when the first actual record that I bought myself was a 45, and it was the Bee Gees' Jive Talkin' was the first record I bought myself. That was 1975. So I was 7.
7 years old,
so,
right.
Yeah, 7 is when I started.
And it was here in New York. So you lived your whole life in New York City?
In this very apartment.
Yeah, you've got a great apartment right by Central Park.
Yeah,
very lucky. But and so when was around the time you said you were telling me about your first synthesizer was it like had an oscillator on it and a keyboard?
Yeah, well, the Juno 106 was kind of Roland's budget synth at the time, so it was a no-frills kind of analog synth, one oscillator, one envelope, not much going on, very basic, one LFO, but it made nice tones, and I was using that with an 808 I had just bought, and an Oberheim DX, a couple of other things, like stuff I was getting really cheap at the time, is when I kind of started.
Okay, so when was that? What year were we talking about?
Well, I started around 96 with that.
Okay, because you said you bought it used, and I know. I mean, you could clear this up for me, but when you see the documentaries on it, what they say is that a lot of the drum machines were made as practice instruments. They're supposed to replace real drums, but they failed commercially for that. And then they ended up in the pawn shops, and people like yourself picked them up and started playing with them as instruments in their own right.
Right, because exactly what you said. They were meant to be practice instruments for organ players, piano players, and they were meant to be used on home demos and stuff like that, which I guess they were, to an extent. But then they kind of took on a life of their own when people started using them for their wacky sounds. At least the original analog drum machines from the late 70s, but in the early 80s, and you had the 808, which was the first fully programmable drum machine, and which also didn't really take off for Roland, and then it was, like you said, in pawn shops.
Right. So going back, I'm just out of curiosity here. You bought a lot of these drum machines, including the 808 early on, and then you have this Oberheimer. What is DX? How do you pronounce it?
Oberheim DX.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's over there. So
actually, it's behind you, covered up,
okay,
next to the Lindrum.
Well, all right. Now the thing is, from what I've understood, that one was one that was supposed to be sort of high end and was supposed to sound a lot like drums, and so that was pretty good at sounding like drums. Is that right, or is that the Lindrum?
Well, both of those used similar technology. They used samples of actual drum hits recorded to ROM, and they were PCM samples that were stored on ROMs, and they were triggered by the sequencer, as opposed to the previous drum machines that sounded nothing like drums because the drums were generated through analog circuitry.
And that would be the 808?
Yeah, all the stuff here, 808, CR68, CR8000.
That's a drum machine there.
Which
too?
one?
I thought that was an answering machine.
Where?
This one right here.
No, they're all drum machines.
Oh, okay, wow.
Those are all analog drum machines. So
okay.
None of them sound like real drums, but that's kind of the charm of it.
Right. I guess and like you keep mentioning, it was the 808 was the one that was people really started using it on records that were commercially successful.
Yeah, I mean, You had Planet Rock, Africa Mambata, Soul Sonic Force. We all know that one was the first big record to use that. But also the same year, a mainstream record, we all know Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing. So that happened
right, and that had
in 1982.
That had that little drum sound. Maybe you can put a demo, you could cut a sound in there or something like that. But that had that kind of, wasn't like anything else. It didn't sound like drums.
No.
It didn't sound like anything else. And he put it in the background, but it worked.
It worked because it was just quirky and unique at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, then all the other ones came out and people realized, hey, it doesn't have to sound like drums.
Well, yeah. I mean, like when people heard the 808 on records, they all started going to pawn shops,
right?
And getting them secondhand real cheap because people were selling them off because they didn't sound like drums. But then those producers were making, like early electro and I won't say techno because that came later, but the early electro funk hip hop records,
right.
As well as synth pop and Italo records. They were all using it. They were all using the 808.
Now, the thing is, though, I was thinking that these days when people listen to music, that they don't really recognize the drums as drums, and they don't really, I don't know, maybe they don't really care, but going back maybe 10, 15 years, people just accept Phil Collins is a great drummer, but he's got these drum machines on his on his record, and all these other people. Prince has you see him live, you see a drummer, but there's all these other drum sounds, and I don't think people realize that these are all drum machines and these are synthesizers, and that's why I thought it's kind of a little bit lacking in the music education of people these days, going back 15 years or so.
Well, these days, although we live in the age of information, the only people that are going to seek out the information are the people that care. Nerdy people like me who want to make their own music and they want to learn about these instruments. The average Joe couldn't give a shit. I mean, the average Joe doesn't care. They just want to know they like the song. They don't like the song. I don't even know if people can tell the difference these days.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I was saying.
And mainly because they don't care, you know. But I'm not sure how much they cared back then either, because like I remember when hip hop was kind of coming, it was still underground. You'd have records that had live band on them. You'd have traditional musicians on there, and then you'd have records coming out the same year with synths and drum machines, and nobody really said, "Oh, I like that one because of this. I like that one." No, it just we liked the song or we didn't. I don't even know if we could tell or cared. I do know that when we heard stuff like Planet Rock for the first time, it was so weird and futuristic sounding.
Okay, Planet Rock. Now let me tell the people who don't know what Planet Rock is, but that was like one of the first. You said Africa Bambaataa, right?
Yeah,
and it came before Africa Bambaataa, I believe.
No,
right?
It technically is Africa Bambaataa.
Yeah,
jointly with producer Arthur Baker and John Roby, who put the whole thing together. They put the music together and then brought in the rappers over it.
Right, and so these were just the early days, and like the 80s, 88 ladies.
Early 82, actually.
82, okay. And that was the 808, right?
Yeah.
That was the 808.
For the drums.
Yeah, and I don't see, that's the thing, I don't think people say that, oh, like that guy, like, George Harrison played the rhythm guitar, Ringo played the drums. There's no guy saying, oh, he's a great 808 player. I mean, maybe some musicians do.
Well, no, I mean... Not really. I mean, you'd say, well, that's a really interesting pattern that someone programmed. Okay. But to tell you the truth, the pattern on Planet Rock was basically a ripoff of what was Kraftwerk had done with Numbers, the song Numbers, the previous year in 1981, which was also a big hit here in New York. So Planet Rock was destined to be big because it referenced Kraftwerk and it referenced some other stuff, all of which were kind of known in the New York urban circle.
So it's going back to what you were saying, I think, because some of these guys are from New York, right? They're from the Bronx, right?
Yeah.
And so they were picking up, they're going into record stores, and they were, like you say, the Kraftwerk, which was like a white boy band from Germany.
Yeah, Kraftwerk was huge here in New York because it had that incessant beat, that groove, and you could dance to it, and it was weird, and it was different, and we went nuts for Kraftwerk here. And Kraftwerk, I mean, that's why Planet Rock became what it was, and that's why ultimately Kraftwerk sued Arthur Baker and John Roby because they didn't get permission to use those melodies.
Right.
From Trans-Europe Express and all that. They used that on there, and they also used part of the composition by Ennio Morricone from the 70s. They kind of ripped off 3 or 4 different records to make Planet Rock.
Right. I think, is it Devo and some of the other bands, too, that there was influential? So that's the thing I'm thinking of, is they were inspired or they influenced by some of these other earlier and rock and roll bands.
Rock and roll bands. They were inspired by P-Funk. They were inspired by Kraftwerk. They were inspired by, who knows, they might have been inspired by other stuff, too. Tangerine Dream.
Right.
I think all of that came into play, and then the new wave, stuff like Human League and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's, to just interrupt you real quick, just important. I think it's kind of important for people to know a little bit about the history, not just of the gear standpoint, but what these, who inspired who, what led to what, and know a little bit about the music history, because everybody's dying now, and it seems that if no one knows or cares, there's going to be this warped music history that is some hipster's imagination. The real history is amazing.
It really is, and there was so much we call it cross-pollination going on there, like New York City and London, England, for some reason had this thing going on where they were really like bouncing ideas off each other. I mean, there was, people from England, like Malcolm McLaren, coming to New York, but, ending up in the South Bronx of all places. This British dude is in the South Bronx. What the hell is he doing here? He's hearing DJs scratching records, and he's hearing drum machines, and he's hearing all hip-hop culture and all this stuff, and he's like, whoa, what is this? So you got a guy from a punk rock background from England. This is just one example.
Yeah, Marshall McLuhan.
And comes over here and ends up making records.
Sex Pistols.
Right, he ends up making records like Buffalo Gals with rappers. It's like, God, I mean, and this is long before the internet.
That butterfly thing.
Madam, right.
Yeah.
And you got to understand this. it was at a time when we had nothing like the internet. So basically, to know what was going on somewhere, you had to basically go over there,
Right.
or find a newspaper from somewhere else, and somehow you got your hands on that. That's the world that we had back then.
Well, people were curious back then too. I mean, they would go to
Yeah.
a record store and they'd put a record on the turntable and they'd sit down and listen to it. It wasn't something I listened to while they were doing something else.
Right.
It was
It was
something they did, and that's all they did.
Right.
Yeah.
That was it, music was a real experience, and that's for me. I pretty much treat music the same way now. It's like there's nothing wrong with having music on and cleaning your house. We all did it back then. We still
Right.
do it now. But I mean, when you really want to listen to music, you really just have to listen to the music and focus on that.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a lost art. I do know people that are still passionate about music, and some of them are young people, the millennials, as we call them. But this is a niche group of people that are really into this stuff in a very kind of passionate, almost nerdy way.
Right.
But
It's hard to say exactly how much and who with this. That's why the podcast. I mean, I don't know who out there in the world is listening, but you never know. I mean, there may be a niche in one part of the world that ends up growing. But going back, I mean, we're sitting here and you've got this great studio and you got all this gear. Let me ask you a couple of questions about some of the things that you have. I'm looking right across from where I'm sitting, and you got this bright red synthesizer with black keys and white. What are those called? Chord keys? Yeah, I'm not a musician.
well, no, the sharps and
the sharps
naturals.
are white.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, they're reversed because this is a Nord Lead 2X anniversary
They're
model.
reversed, right.
So they reversed the keys, and that's pretty much the only difference. It's really a 2X under the hood, but I like it because it was limited edition.
What is it about Nord? I think I saw it in the Cult used it recently. I saw on stage. I was looking at there, and
The band, The
yeah,
Cult?
the band, the Cult. They're going into synthesizers a little bit more
Are
now.
they?
And I looked at that red. What's that red synth? Because I was starting to get into it, and it was a Nord.
Well, I
I think it was a Nord.
probably there aren't too many red.
Yeah, you
synths
can
out
kind of
there.
identify it.
Clavia, the company that makes this line, Clavia from Sweden, all their stuff is red. That's kind of their trademark. And well, I think the attraction with their stuff is the lead stuff is all virtual analog, and it sounds pretty convincing. It may not sound exactly like an analog synth, but they're very lightweight. They're sturdy. They're rugged enough for the road, and I think that's kind of the appeal. Is they're light and rugged.
Okay, so they're talking about the Nord, and what is this orange? I'm sitting on the couch, and across from me is like I said, the red, and then you got the orange. What is the orange? What is that?
That's
it's bright orange.
That's
it looks great.
That's a what's called a wavetable synth made by a German company called Waldorf, and this is the XTK keyboard, and it's kind of hard to find now. This was made in, I believe, around 1999, 2000. I don't think they made too many of them because it's really hard to find now. You can find the rack version, but you can't find this keyboard version too much. Wavetable synthesis is it's different from traditional analog, but it's set up in a way that people that understand analog subtractive synths can understand. And the oscillators are not regular oscillators; they're sampled waveforms. So that opens the door from different types of sonics because you don't have to stick with the traditional waveforms like sine and triangle and sawtooth. You can have anything as a oscillator.
Okay.
So that's what wavetable, and then you can.
All right. Well, let me go back just a little bit. Now you mentioned we were talking about analog before, and nowadays everybody's into the new old analog synthesizers.
Yeah.
So when we say the analog synthesizers, like you say, that's original oscillator. Now, what's the other stuff? Like Roland is making a lot of their Aria and some of their other gear. It's just purely they got like 5 different synthesizers in one synthesizer, but it's not analog. It's just computerized samples or something like that generated.
Well, no, actually, it's not sample based, but it is 100% digital. For example, when you're talking about the Ira line, like behind me, the System 8, basically that lets you load software plugins into dedicated hardware. rather than just having it stuck in your computer. So you can load it into this hardware and you can take it anywhere with you and not have to worry about having a computer around. But under the hood is basically just, similar to virtual analog synth. It's just a microprocessor computing code. In this case, Roland has it so that it's emulating the Jupiter 8 and the Juno 106 and some of their old synths, but it's something called analog circuit behavior.
Okay.
And basically you're modeling those synths.
Okay. So, and you like most of your stuff is most of your gear is analog, old vintage synthesizers. You don't seem to be into the new stuff so much.
Well, this is about as new as I'll get.
Apart from the Nord.
Yeah. The Roland System 8 is a new piece of gear, but it's emulating old gear, so I don't know if that counts either way. But yeah, for the most part, I have a lot of vintage stuff here.
Is there anybody making something new that's new and exciting, though, now? I mean,
is
it all just old stuff?
Well, this is kind of a subjective question. There's a lot of new analog stuff being made. But the cynical person would say, "Oh yeah, but you're making new stuff. That's already been explored. Those sounds have been done."
Like Arturia and Korg and people like that.
Yeah, so that's the cynical approach. But I'm all for it. And I don't really care if it's analog or digital as long as it can make interesting sounds. I will say that there might be a lacking in new types of synthesis coming out, because the new stuff coming out, as I said, it's either emulating analog or it's actual new analog. And these are not really new instruments. They're new instruments, but they're using, architecture that's been around forever. It's not really...
Yeah, they got some weird way of copying it with the emulation, whatever that is, process that they do, right?
Yeah. I mean, like the Arturia, the Mini Brute and the Micro Brute, they're analog synths. And I think you're getting incredible value when you buy one of those. And they're pretty feature packed, but they're not really...
The little Volcas, I think, are also...
Yeah, those are great. They're $150. The whole series is great.
Right.
But you're not really getting anything otherworldly. You're getting, for the most part, familiar types of textures. There's nothing wrong with that, because, hey, a guitar is a familiar texture, a piano is a familiar texture. Right. So obviously people still want those sounds.
Right. And now one more thing I was going to say earlier and I forgot. Now I brought all this crap in here. I got some of this stuff new, and I hope everything turns out. But one of the points I wanted to make is that for the new people to understand kind of what's going on, because there seems to be like they're going way ahead of us. These companies and these designers are getting way out in front of all the musicians and everybody else. And they're coming up with the drum machines that are combined with these DJ sets and are, and they're cross-mating between the DJ and the different kinds of DJs and the synthesizers and the drum machines, and there are all these combo packages.
Yeah.
And and some of the people that listen, because like in my class when I teach, I mentioned it to somebody the other day, and he said, "Oh, well, those hip hop guys, they don't do anything. They just sit. People think they just sit there and make up dumb lyrics or dumb rhymes. They don't realize that they're programming and they're putting together all of these." It says, like, what does this guy do? Well, they create the whole soundscape themselves.
Right.
And I don't know if everybody really appreciates that. But it's interesting. It's interesting, the new gear that they're coming up with. Have you done any of that DJ gear or seen any of that stuff?
I'm aware of the stuff. I've seen it being used. Since I don't really DJ on any type of regular basis, I don't really use the stuff, but I'm very aware of the stuff coming out where they are integrating...
like it's a DJ 808.
They're integrating instrumentation with DJ gear and trying to make it an all-in-one kind of performance apparatus for a DJ, which is, hey, it's great, the people that say, what are you doing? You're just pushing buttons. You're just doing this. Those are people that don't really understand the process, don't really know what...
Right, and I think a lot of people are like that.
Yeah, a lot of people like that, and unless you show them and sit them down and say, hey, this is what this person is doing, unless you do that, they're not going to get it.
And there's people like Kanye West who make a big ass out of themselves, and so they just think everybody's just, they're just arrogant You know, they don't know that there's a real art that goes into making some of those.
Well, he's giving that
human race.
He's giving it a bad name because for the people that don't like hip hop to begin with, they're going to use that as a you know.
Yeah.
He should have shut up and just hone his craft and.
Yeah, back in the old days, the musicians just left it to the music to express themselves.
Yeah, these guys were faceless back then. It's only now recently that we get to see what they look like.
Yeah.
Guys like Arthur Baker, and you know, they were cooped up in the studio making tracks. They you know.
One of the things I liked about Pink Floyd was they weren't, you know, they didn't have their faces on the covers and everything.
Right.
It was just the art. It was just the artwork.
Yeah.
And then their music, and then just what you listen to.
Kind of like Genesis did that too. They didn't really put their face
out there. Okay, well, yeah, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but let me just, before we end, and I hope this, I think this one here is coming out okay. Let's go over a couple of your instruments. So you talked about the Nord, and you talked about, what was this orange thing you wear?
That Waldorf XTK.
Waldorf XTK. I encourage you guys, maybe I could get some pictures on the website or something, go out and look at some of these instruments. And I mean, they're awesome. Maybe in the future I'll get some kind of a video of some people playing them. But there's plenty of stuff on the 808 you have up there.
Yeah, I mean, there are millions of recorded examples of that machine.
Right.
But you know, I could cut in some.
Yeah, like here.
Right here.
Yeah.
And then we should talk about the Prophet 5, which
there's a lot of stuff on the Prophet 5
the Prophet
as well.
5,
some crazy people
surprised
on the internet.
Haven't talked about it until this point in the interview.
Yeah.
But you know, along with the 808 and the Lindrum and the DMX, defined the aesthetics of the first half of the 80s pretty much. And you know, the Prophet 5 was the first synthesizer with a CPU in it to allow you to store patches and recall them. So that was a big deal.
Oh, does it have a floppy or was it?
No, it's a CPU. It's a processor.
Oh, okay, because some of them had those were little floppy.
That was a little later, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, that was a microprocessor. So
Dave Smith, is he who does he work with on that, or was this his design?
Oh, that's really, well, he had a couple of people running his company with him, but that was really his design, Dave Smith. And Dave Smith is still around making new stuff. But as far as the Prophet 5 goes, that was kind of what he's really known for. There was a book that came out recently about his company, Sequential Circuits, and it focuses on the picture on the cover is obviously the Prophet 5. Right. But I'll give your listeners a couple of examples that I like, which had the Prophet 5 in the forefront, and I'll let you hear them now.
Okay. Now the thing is, what's this little wheel that you're playing with? Who invented that? The little mod wheel, the arpeggiator. Is that an arpeggiator? How do you say it?
The wheels on
the little wheels on the side of the thing.
Okay, well,
these things right here. What are they?
The one on the left is typically the pitch wheel. Allows you to vary the pitch of the oscillators when they're playing, whether it's one note or a chord. And the wheel on the right is used typically for modulation, which allows you to introduce like vibrato effects or filter modulation effects. And the modulation is created by something called an LFO, which is a low-frequency oscillator, which is another waveform similar to an oscillator, but you don't hear the waveform, you just hear its effect on something.
Right.
So it's an invisible waveform that you use to modulate other stuff.
Okay, now, so it was in the very first synthesizer because it's part of the whole thing. But who put it on the side of the keyboard? Was that the Prophet or was that someone else?
No, that was Bob Moog.
Oh, so the Moog.
Yeah, he's the one that came up with that because his first synths were modular and well, actually Quincy Jones takes credit for this. He approached Bob Moog and said, "Look, Actually, Bob Moog asked Quincy Jones, why aren't any African-American musicians using my instruments? He goes, because you can't bend the notes, man. You got to find a way to bend the notes, and then you got to make it bluesy. We want to play this like we play a guitar. So then that gave Bob Moog the idea, how do I bend the pitch, And they came up with the whole wheel thing.
Okay.
And then every other company, copied that.
So now going back to Bob Moog, is it Moog? That's how you pronounce it?
Technically it's Moog, but everyone says Moog.
Everyone says Moog. Well, Moog sounds better than Moog,
Yeah.
They sound like brothers, twin brothers. One's had a problem. But so when they first came out with the Moog, Bob Moog, was it used in movies? People didn't really see it as a musical instrument, I guess. That's what I heard from watching stuff on YouTube and stuff, documentaries. There's a couple documentaries out there.
I think the earlier Moogs were probably a little bit more off-putting because they just were, patch chords and
we
so
had the
forth.
theremin too. It was the first thing he made money selling, which is you wave your hands in the air and it creates some kind of electrical field.
That
right?
was used on Lost Planet and all those shows from the 50s. And
maybe you could demonstrate. I don't know if you.
I don't have a theremin.
You don't have
but
a theremin, but it's like
woo. Yeah, it's kind of a weird,
clipped
spooky.
it, I think.
You did clip.
Yeah.
It's a weird, spooky kind of sound that it makes, and I think that sound is kind of relatively easy to create
I have
on a
theremin,
synthesizer.
actually.
You have it. Yeah, that's right.
Just
you told
for
me.
playing around with it. Yeah.
It's kind of hard to play.
It's
hard to control.
There was one of my students who you could find her on the YouTube, but she plays in the subway. She went back to Japan. Yeah, it's popular in Japan.
Is it?
Evidently, yeah. And there's a MOOCs and there's a theremin society. But yeah, so he started selling those things.
Yeah.
Who knows to who?
People at education, schools would buy them to teach physics. This is all physics.
Right.
All this is physics. Everything we've been talking about, oscillators, envelopes, filters. This is all physics.
Right.
So yeah, they would use it.
Originally scientific instruments.
They would
right?
use them for educational purposes. Yeah,
Right,
in schools and stuff. But the Mini Moog was Bob's way of saying, let me condense this thing into something that's not so intimidating. And have a regular keyboard on it and have these wheels here and everything's labeled so that musicians can figure out how to shape these sounds. And that thing took off. I mean, 1971 till 1981, he made that thing. He made like 12,000 of them. And that's all over.
Yeah,
every kind of
most
music.
of the Moogs were real expensive though too, is right?
Oh yeah, no. I mean,
high end. They were must was a car and a house, something like that.
well, if you adjust for inflation, it's a lot of money. I'm not sure what it retailed for back in its heyday, but a lot.
Right.
You had to have the cash, and so studios could afford them, but the average musician probably couldn't afford one.
So we're kind of jumping all over the place, which is. It's okay, I think, though, because it's a little bit complicated. But you have Bob Moog, who came before you,
way before me,
but also before the Prophet,
Yeah.
and so the Prophet came out a decade or so later, right? And then what were the kind of music that was being played on the Prophet?
Oh man,
I mean, we have a lot. I think I wrote down
everything, popular music, new age music. Tangerine Dream used it. Vangelis used it. I'm sure it was used.
The guy in Yes, what's his name? Rick Wakeman. Yeah.
Tony Banks of Genesis, Phil Collins himself. Everybody in every type of music.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what happened with the Mini Moog. It was used by everybody for anything and everything for a good 6-year run.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, a lot of sounds. I know the Beatles and people like that have it in the back, in the background of their Moog as well.
I think they did. I mean, they're not known for using
synths
per se,
what they're
but
doing.
I think they used.
Yeah, what they're doing now. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's interesting to anybody else but me. But they're on Facebook and stuff. They're starting to spread around parts of different albums. So they have Abbey Road's Moog, and I heard that and was kind of interesting. Just the isolated.
The isolated. So, what songs was that used on?
It was from Abbey Road.
The album.
Something, and
there's Moog on that song.
Yeah.
Something. I know the song.
Yeah, there's
a
a Moog on that, and you know how it bleeds over into.
Segues
into the one about the Queen and
okay,
you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
Yeah, and Golden Slumbers.
It's on there. Yeah,
Golden Slumbers, stuff like that. It's subtle and it's in the background.
It's more like an effect, right?
Yeah.
It's not like a musical.
Yeah,
thing.
it's not a musical thing. It's an effect. In the background.
Okay,
and that's why once they isolate it, it sounds really interesting.
I have to check that out.
It's whereas a lot of these other instruments, I mean, they're right in your face. They're a critical part of it. But adding texture and subtlety, I think, is it's kind of interesting. I was going over here, and I was also looking at your Linn drum, and all the people. Looking at my notes here, Prince, Tears for Fears used the Linn drum. Freddie Mercury, ABBA, Falco, so many people. Phil Collins, the Linn drum, which is the drum machine. That's another one that was pretty popular. What time did that came in early, right? The Lynn and the Oppenheimer, the DX.
Well, the first Lynn drum was the LM1, which was 1980, and then only 500 of those were made, and it was really expensive. And Prince is the guy that really made best use of that, and that was only around for 2 years. Then the actual Lynn drum came out in 1982, and that was much more affordable and more accessible, and that got used on kind of like the 808, like every kind of music under the sun,
right,
for the next 4 or 5 years.
So going back and counting everything, you've got Bog Moog, then you've got the a little bit later. The next one was what would the next one be after Moog? You got a time, I guess. Moog was there for a little while, and then you have the Prophet.
Well, then you had
and the drum machines.
You had Oberheim coming out in the mid '70s with their stuff, trying to do a polyphonic synths, but not doing a practical version of it. And then you had Dave Smith in 1978 with the Prophet 5, and he kind of like ruled for the next few years because nobody else came out with anything that could put a dent in its popularity.
And so the synthesizers at that time, like the early 80s, and the drum machines were all coming up about the same time. And so there was this kind of a bit of a renaissance back then, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that renaissance shaped, popular music. I think for the better. Some people might not agree with that, but yeah, I mean, especially in the early '80s with the advent of stuff like Planet Rock and all the R&B that was coming out at the time was phenomenal because it was utilizing that new technology. This was all new technology and being exploited,
right?
As much as they could. Whereas today we have much more advanced technology, but people don't seem to be really exploiting it. They just kind of like going through the motions with it. So that's kind of the analogy I wanted to make. It was like you had simple stuff back then, really exploited and really used creatively. Now you have really advanced stuff, and nobody's really putting a dent, in my opinion, in it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, back then, I guess people don't really pay that much attention to all the progress made in the music side because video, MTV, and all this stuff was kind of dominating. It was like a little bit of an overload. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's sometimes when the music when things don't seem to be happening on the surface, they are happening in the background somewhere. So there may be some people out there that are experimenting. I know the designers are, like you said, with all these new synths, they're just coming up with amazing things.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to take time maybe for somebody to come out there and actually create some good stuff with it.
Yeah, I mean,
like you,
like me, why not? I mean, there are some guys out there that are really making some nice music, some really good stuff. It gets a little subjective, of course. And it, like I said, sometimes, I mean, exploiting the technology might not lead to an album that or a song that's groundbreaking, but maybe it's just a really compelling piece of music.
Right.
It doesn't have to be reinventing the wheel every time. It just could be something that, really moves someone.
Right. Now, I was gonna. So going back to some of the stuff that you're doing. So what are you? You're a producer. You have an album. Sorry, not an album. You have a label, right? So what is a label exactly? For people that hear, I have a label, or that's on this label, it gets confusing. It's produced by who? So a label is what?
Well, these days, almost anyone can call themselves a label. They have a logo. They can release music digitally, and like, oh, look, I'm a label. And basically, that's what's going on. It's just people putting out their music under some kind of brand, so that it can be found or it can be recognized. I like a label to have more than just digital downloads in their catalog. I think it's important to have some kind of tangible media, because years from now, who knows if those digital downloads will be in existence, if they're located on someone's hard drive.
It's kind of weird to know what's going to happen in the future with this stuff. That
music has to be stored somewhere on some big server that won't be destroyed or erased, and I don't know if that's happening. So for that reason, I like tangible media. Like we said before, vinyl's on the upswing. I still like CDs, people have given up on CDs for the most part, but I still think they're a really good format. They sound great, and they're very durable.
Back a long time ago, what they were thinking that the CD would evolve into a credit card or some other little physical device, but it didn't. It ended up just disappearing into the digital world. But maybe it'll come back as something
they're
else.
still being made.
Vinyl's coming back.
Yeah, along with the resurgence of vinyl, now, much to my dismay, cassettes are back.
Oh, really?
And that one is throwing me for a loop because, it was always a very unreliable format, and it hasn't gotten any better.
Well, the 8-tracks were great because they would chunk right in the middle of a song, yeah.
Yeah, the sound quality on those or cassettes weren't great. The reliability factor is just...
Right.
You could play it on the wrong deck and it'll get destroyed.
Yeah.
Cassette, and now people are
putting
out albums.
Used to have the for people that don't know, there were these big things. The 8-track, so you'd push them in, and it would go chunk, and there was some satisfaction of that. But then with the little small cassettes and the 8-tracks, sometimes you pull them out, and the tape itself would get caught in the machine.
Oh my God! And why do people want to relive that?
Yeah.
I got a couple of cassettes here that were made like last year. And I played them on my other deck, and they got destroyed within 10 minutes. I'm like, I know it was the deck that did it, but the point is, these things are very fragile. What's the attraction?
Right. And it's so hard if they don't make decks anymore. I think Tascam's the only one that makes a deck. You can find some old Nakamichis, but...
well, now with the resurgence of cassettes, I bet you there'll be companies making tape decks again.
Yeah.
Just like there are shitloads of companies up the wazoo making some kind of turntable now.
Right. There's a lot of
that. A lot of it looks a little gimmicky to me. A lot of it looks very hipsterish.
Yeah.
I don't know if the quality is always going to be there, but just I'll stick with my Techniques 1200s, the workhorses.
Well, I'm hoping to do another one with some of the guys that do turntables. There's some people around here that make some pretty good turntables in the United States, VPI, for example.
Yeah.
And some of the other ones are over in Europe. There's no Japanese have the Pioneer and the Technics, and those are all the DJ things. Anyway, that's another story.
That's another story.
But you got a couple turntables that you're working with, I see. I noticed over there.
1200s Techniques.
Yeah. So you could do the sampling. So let's go back real quick before we end. Because we didn't really talk that much about your company and the recordings that you have. There was you have other artists on your website. Is that your website, Spazzoid Records?
Yeah,
what's the URL again?
Well, my website is spazzoid.com. That's SPAZZOID.com, and my catalog is both on CD Baby and Bandcamp. That would be http://reno.bandcamp.com. Reno with 2 E's. And you can see pretty much and hear my entire label catalog up there.
Yeah, I see Reeno, REENO.BANDCAMP.com, Reno.bandcamp.com. That has your catalog on there as well.
Yeah,
that's the one
everything's
that I
up
copied on there. Now, you had a couple of these ones I thought were kind of funny. You had, back in the day, Paul Hardcastle made this thing, and I think he used the 808, was it? And he used 19?
Yeah.
Where he intermixed, or he did samples with the drum machine, and he created this sort of politically charged commentary on the Vietnam War.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And that was basically 808 for the drums, Prophet 5 for the chords and the bass. And then the EMU emulator was triggering the vocal samples, that 19 thing.
Right.
And so that's pretty much, I think, all he used on that. And for those who don't know, he did that song in 5 different languages.
Oh, he did?
He did Spanish, Italian, French, Japanese, and English.
I noticed you had one on your website, Massive Corruption, dedicated to Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That's kind of my... I had this instrumental, and I wanted to make it more interesting, so I decided to make it kind of on like the 19 kind of.
Yeah.
A lot of people have compared it to that, and I guess that would be the easiest thing to compare it to. I usually don't do politically charged stuff, but the 2016 election had me so just wound up over everything that was going on, and Not to get too political here, but yeah, I was really into Bernie and the stuff that he wanted to do for the country, and I watched how he was marginalized by the Democrats and basically sabotaged, and I wanted to put that into a song.
Corruption.
Well, maybe this is a stretch, but you said before, you made the point that back then people used to really explore, and I guess the atmosphere back then was maybe life was important and you really have to kind of make a difference. And maybe that will cause them, and maybe the Vietnam War and the hippies and the drugs and all the things that are going on, maybe that sort of fermented or pollinated, the artistic community. So
I think so.
Maybe this what's going on now will be good for the artistic community. With all these brand new tools, maybe we'll have a whole new thing coming out.
I think that's a very valid point. I remember a guitarist friend of mine a long time ago when we were talking about music of the 60s and 70s and 80s. He goes, usually when the economy is bad, the music is very good at that time. And I think what you just said is kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, our economy may not be quite in the shitter as it once was, but a lot of folks aren't doing well, and there's a lot of frustration. That's pretty much why Trump got elected. Not that he's going to do anything about that. That's a whole other, I don't want to get into that. But the point is, people are frustrated, people are hurting, people are living paycheck to paycheck. Usually good art comes out of that strife.
Well, the feelings go deep, I guess.
Feelings go deep, and I think the art usually blossoms in times like this. Knock on wood.
Right.
Keep my fingers crossed.
Okay. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring up? I mean, with all of this gear over here, something you might want to play or demonstrate to the audience? It would be nice. We didn't do it in there. Maybe we could cut it in later. Some Moog sounds.
Oh yeah,
that's my favorite. I really like the Moog. The Moog is just weird. And maybe it's my Pink Floyd in me, but I like a lot of that stuff.
Pink Floyd, probably. I mean, Rick Wright, the keyboardist. I'm sure you know the album "Wish You Were Here."
Right.
It's my personal Floyd favorite. The song "Welcome to the Machine," that solo that just tears through your speakers and reverberates. That's a Minimoog.
Okay.
I mean, it's quite obvious that's what it is. The opening chords, I think, were multi-tracked Minimoog. That's what I heard. I'm not 100% on that. But in order to get those pads, they had to record it 6 and 7 times for each note. That's
one of the things I liked about the band is they were experimenting with all of that stuff, and they put it right up front. They made it part of their.
They weren't afraid of using technology, whereas. You had a band like Queen who would make disclaimers on their album. No synthesizers were used.
Right.
It was all done on guitar. Like that, until 1980 when they said this album is the first appearance of a synthesizer.
Right. Yeah, I think the Eagles were against some processing and stuff like that. The oral affix exciter or something like that.
I don't even know what that was. That was some weird thing that
they were doing in the studios to compress the music and somehow, but they didn't like that. But anyway, there's kind of a resistance about it. Like we have now. People are resisting a lot of the hip hop stuff.
They were resisting it. I mean, I hate to sound like an old, back in my time, but yeah, I mean, I brought home the earliest. It wasn't even called hip hop. Back then it was called rap. And my mother wasn't feeling it.
Yeah.
But she dug all my other stuff.
Yeah.
But she just didn't dig the actual talking over the. She goes, why are they talking? I said, I don't know, Mom. It's just what they do. This is the new sound. This is where it's at.
Right.
She never got into it, but I think if you compare some of those records to what's going on now, I would say some of those records were miles ahead in what's going on now, at least on the top 40 circuit. In creativity.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm biased because that was my era, but really, I mean, a lot of the stuff being made now sounds like it's really just churned out with, let's churn them out. Let's not really put anything in there that's going to, upset anyone or, make people stop and really want to hear what's going on. I think it's just kind of
hard to know whether it's just yourself, because I try to keep away from criticizing too much because I don't really know what's me and there's something going on because people always have said that.
People have always said that, and people are going to say you're old and it's subjective and this and that. But I do see a lot of the processes have been streamlined just to generate a quick product, and the same goes for Hollywood. Right. I think when you watch movies nowadays, my wife and we watch movies and like the camera work is just terrible, and I know it's not me. Right. I do understand it's subjective, but I mean, you can tell when there's really good camera work going on, and when there's just somebody standing there with a handheld. I'm like, you're making me dizzy. Right. Where's the art? In the filmmaking these days, maybe the indie films that are being made.
Yeah, there are good films.
But Hollywood, I think Hollywood's lost it, man. I think they just.
Well, I think Quentin Tarantino said that there's enough good movies out there. I'm frying up a little bit, but there's the good movies out there that justify. I mean, let me restate that. There are movies out there that are crap that make a lot of money, and they are allowing the other movies to exist. And there's enough good movies out there to justify that.
Tarantino said that?
Yeah, that formula. You know what I mean? So I mean, they might those artistic movies might not exist if it weren't for the other ones.
Good point.
So
I'll take it then.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we could stop there and we could double check and see how we did.
Sure.
Okay. And
thank you for doing this interview. Thank you for your time.
Oh yeah, I hope everything turned out okay. And let's just find out.
Okay.
You've been listening to the Uncommon Core Podcast with Thomas Howell. I'm Satoko Smith. Thank you for listening.